There's multiple directions to curiosity. It's not just getting curious about the other person that's in front of me. I also need to be inwardly curious. I need to extend that curiosity towards myself. I need to really explore and investigate how I'm showing up in spaces, how I'm wielding power, how I'm thinking about people. What are the biases and assumptions I might hold? How might I counter that? That's all a part of the journey of curiosity too.
We often think of curiosity as one-dimensional or intellectual. That is, as the desire to know or understand something. Scott Shigeoka says the research differentiates heart-centered curiosity from intellectual curiosity, and that it's heart-centered curiosity that has the power to make people feel seen, heard, and valued. In this interview, Scott describes how moving from shallow to deep curiosity is a powerful and strategic tool for leaders to understand others and themselves better, and ultimately to create more engaging and productive organizations. Scott's debut book, Seek: How Curiosity Can Transform Your Life and Change the World, blends research based in his work at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center with vulnerable storytelling to teach readers how to strengthen their curiosity muscles. Scott has shared his research on the value of curiosity with The Today Show, Harvard Business Review, NPR, The Guardian, CNBC, and with organizations like Google, Microsoft, Pixar, and Meta. Scott has taught at the University of Pennsylvania and the University of California Berkeley, and he currently teaches courses on innovative design at the University of Texas at Austin. Special thanks to today's host, Lori Murphy, Assistant Division Director for Executive Education at the Federal Judicial Center. Lori, take it away.
Scott, we are delighted to have you. Thank you for being here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Scott, your book is all about curiosity. So, how do you define curiosity?
Yeah, so curiosity is a desire to know or to understand. And we often think about it in the intellectual way. We think about getting curious about something that we learned in the world or to help us on our next pub trivia, or we read books or listen to podcasts like this one. We read through the news, and that's all a way to learn about topics that we care about or are interested in. And it's driven by this desire to know. But there's also this other part of curiosity, which lives not in the mind, but in the heart. And so I call that heart-centered curiosity. And that's about how do you really understand the person that's in front of you as an act of care, as an act of love, to really see this person fully, to know their stories, to know the nuances and complexities that make them who they are. How do you ask questions that don't just stick to the shallows, but actually get you a deeper view of who this person is? And when you use your heart-centered curiosity in this way as a desire to understand the person in front of you, it's really a force of connection. And that's what I see as one of the most beautiful promises of curiosity, especially in this time when we are in a moment of disconnection and division.
Heart-centered curiosity. Help me understand what that looks like in a work context.
We know that when people feel heard, the research supports this, that they're more likely to be engaged, and they're more likely to not be absent from work, and also they're more likely to be better collaborators in the workforce. And so you want a team that has a really strong culture where people are not adversarial, but are actually working towards common goals together, and creating a workplace where people like showing up and want to come to work. And another thing about curiosity that's really great is it increases happiness levels. There is a correlation between increased curiosity and increased happiness. Obviously, there's a lot of great benefits for a happier work culture, especially in a moment when well-being becomes increasingly more important for all generations, but especially for younger generations as they look for where do I want to work? I want to work in a place that feels like it's giving my well-being a positive increase. We hear a lot of stories of workplaces that are toxic, are places that feel very combative or hostile. And those aren't workplaces that A, we want to work in and join, or B, want to stay in. So we can harness as leaders this heart-centered curiosity. We can really bring in top talent. We can create a culture that feels really abundant and joyful and engaging. And we can also keep people there longer and more engaged in the work that we are so grateful to do.
One of the things you said is the correlation between curiosity and happiness. And if I am being curious, I'm therefore going to be happier, or if someone is being curious about me, I'm going to be happier, or is it both?
It's hard to know for sure. Is someone who is happier just naturally more curious, or is someone who's more curious going to become naturally happier? What we do know for sure is that there is a correlation. And so, when you are more curious in the world, towards others, even towards yourself, that really helps us to reflect, to learn more, to grow, to deepen our connections to one another. A lot of mediators will use curiosity as a way to decrease hostility or to decrease negative emotions that we're feeling towards one another when whether that's going through a workplace conflict. When you look at it as a whole, the multidimensionality of curiosity and all the things it does make sense that when you bring more curiosity into your life, it is likely going to lead to a happier life.
You talk about curiosity being on a spectrum.
Mhm.
What does one end of that spectrum, deep curiosity, actually look like? And conversely, what does the other end of that spectrum, shallow
Yeah.
curiosity, look like?
And, shallow is not worse than deep. They're just different ends of the spectrum. So, shallow curiosity is really just getting bits of pieces of information about who a person is. It might be their name, it might be, what they do for their work. It's really about just, sort of getting a surface or shallow understanding of who a person is. But there's so much more that you could see and learn about this person in front of you.
Why might you engage in shallow curiosity?
I like to say that curiosity is earned, it is not deserved. So, in other words, in order for you to ask questions about someone's personal lives, you should have the trust and the relationship to actually ask those questions, or else it might be considered invasive. Starting from a shallow curiosity point of view is really helpful to in the beginning stages of forming a relationship, to really start to build that trust and start to build the depth and the strength of that relationship, to start asking those deeper questions. And as you grow, you can start moving more and more to the deep end.
So, if I'm a leader in an organization such as the judiciary, for example, and I'm having a conversation with someone on my staff, and assuming that I have built up trust, what might a conversation like that look or sound like?
I think the big thing about deep curiosity is that it allows you to see more nuance, and it allows you to see more complexity, and it allows you to see the multidimensionality of people, because we are not just one thing. And so, as a result of us being deeply curious, we start to counter some of the assumptions that we hold about the people around us or the people that we work with. I think the second piece is that that's where the magic lives, right? And so when you ask a question like, what is your name? That gives you some insight about who a person is. That's shallow curiosity. But I like to say the question of what is the story of your name reveals so much more of the magic of who they are. And so, what is the story of your name might give you insight on their parents or whoever named them. It might give you insight on their culture. A big question I have for folks are like, what are those deep curiosity questions that you've been asked or that you've asked others that really have lit people up, that have given them the stars in their eyes, that have made them really think or wonder or get really excited, that have gotten them really engaged in conversation? And actually write those down. We focus so much as a culture on the answers and writing down all the answers, but I think we should also focus on the questions. What are the right kinds of questions to ask? What are the kinds of questions that are really provocative, that are really engaging? And write those down and honor those too.
What are some other deeply curious questions that we might ask that would feel okay?
I would absolutely love to inspire courageousness. If you choose to be courageous, what often happens is someone's like, thank you. Like, no one's ever asked me that question before, or I've been dying for someone to ask me that question, or I finally feel human in this workplace. So I definitely want to encourage people to ask questions that are non invasive, that are based on trust and relationship, but that are deeper and get to the heart of what it means to be human. I like to start with what's getting you excited and fired up at work. And so that gives you more of an insight on how they want to spend their time, what's really exciting them. It gets them really engaged too when we're talking about something that we're excited about. So when you're asking someone what you're getting curious about, you're seeing the things that they want to bring more attention to, things that they want to grow into. And that's like a really exciting question as well. And then just like a final one that feels really rote that we sometimes ask, how was your weekend? Or, oh, you just went on this trip. Like, how was it? I think sometimes those don't land because we don't necessarily have the genuine passionate excitement ourselves around knowing the answers to those questions. So, what I would say is find something that you yourself are really genuinely passionate about and then attach it to that question. So, for instance, maybe you're a big foodie. So, instead of being like, oh, how was your trip? How was your weekend? Saying, what was the best meal you tried in Italy? What was your favorite restaurant that you went to in Cincinnati, wherever they went to? And when it becomes tied to what you're genuinely curious about, they will feel that. They will feel your genuine interest in that topic and in wanting to know the answer versus it being like an autopilot thing where you're just saying it to say it, which is what we often encounter, especially in the workplace.
How do we balance this, asking the practical questions of work related stuff with
Mhm.
being curious and deeply connecting to those with whom we work?
I think it's so important, whether it's in our schools or our workplaces, or in our communities or even in our families, to really think about how are we intentionally creating an environment that allows everyone here to be really curious, to explore what they're interested in, to be interested in each other, regardless of the differences that we might have, to find those commonalities, to understand one another in a deeper way. I think, like, yes, let's do more of that. I think one way that a leader can move into a culture of curiosity, especially when so much is sometimes working against it, is to just be aware when you are being incurious. Because as a leader, you're modeling behavior and that really matters. And oftentimes, when you're actually observing other leaders in action, what you'll notice is that a team member will come up to them and they'll say, gosh, I feel like with that case, or like, with this project, I didn't do as great of a job as I wanted to, or I left some stones unturned, and I'm feeling kind of bad about that. And what a leader might do, because they want them to feel engaged, they want them to feel encouraged, is they'll say, no, you did such a great job. Don't worry about it. In that case, the leader might think they're being encouraging, but what I would say they're being is incurious. And the reason why they're being incurious is because this team member just came to you probably pretty vulnerably and said, here's how I feel about how I did on my performance. And your reply was to contradict that worldview, to say, you're wrong, you did a good job. And not only does that erode their confidence, because they're almost gaslit into thinking, do I have an accurate view of myself? It also closes the door from curiosity and connection. And so what I would recommend is saying, hey, I don't think you did a bad job on that project or on that case or whatever it is, but tell me more. Tell me more about, why you felt that way. That opens a door for curiosity. That opens a door for you to understand why they might have felt that way. It might be an uncomfortable conversation. It might feel a lot more vulnerable for both of you, but it actually allows them to share their experience, to say, here's why I feel that way. And that opens a door for so much more possibility. You might recognize, wow, they have this really deeply intense negative self-talk voice that's inside of themselves, and I want to just be aware of that. Or you might realize, wow, when they say they failed, I was holding on to an assumption about that word failure. And so opening the door towards curiosity and towards connection by saying, hey, I didn't feel that way, but tell me more, it is a moment of catching yourself and acknowledging when we are being incurious. Sometimes we ask questions to other folks or get curious about others, and they don't get curious towards us back. And that can sometimes demotivate us. So, what I often say is remember that reciprocity has multiple forms. And so, one is specific reciprocity, which means like I ask you a question, you ask me back. I get curious about you, so you get curious about me in this moment. But there's also generalized reciprocity, which is more about you get curious about you, and then maybe you get curious about someone else, and then somewhere else down the line, like someone will get curious about me. And we all have our reservoirs and our tanks that are getting filled by one another. We're all interconnected in a way. It's not just about you and me in this vacuum, but we're all doing our best to give this gift of curiosity to each other, knowing and trusting that it will come back to us because we're creating that culture of curiosity. And then I think the other piece around staying in curiosity longer, like you were mentioning, for me, this is more a personal story, but I'm a queer person. I remember coming out and not everyone was open to it, and not everyone was understanding of it, and not everyone was curious towards me. And I think that I was definitely fueled in a positive way by those who were, that acknowledged me, that affirmed me, that were curious about me. But it was important to me to never give up on those who didn't yet get curious and didn't yet understand and didn't yet acknowledge, because we could stay in relationship with each other and I could stay curious for longer and to trust that hopefully one day that will come. And in this case, fortunately, it did.
The power of the word yet.
I write about this in Seek. There's Anukkatavada, which is what I've been described as the living in the perhapsness, which is really closely connected to the yet. We all grow. We all recognize the mistakes or the failings that we had in our own assumptions and our own biases. But the only way to really interrupt those biases is we have to stay in contact with each other. We actually have to be exposed to one another in our differences. If we just continue to be incurious and in our own bubbles, those changes will never happen. And so it can be uncomfortable to be in relationship with people who disagree with us and who hold very different views than us. But it is vital, I think, to creating belonging and to actually moving forward.
We talked about deep curiosity to shallow curiosity. And there's almost the other end of the spectrum. It's called predatory
Mm,
curiosity.
mhm, mhm. I just actually was interviewed for this New York Times article that was exactly about this predatory curiosity, which is when we ask questions or we get curious, but there's really an ulterior motive underneath it. I'm going to keep asking you this question and keep prying and keep doing that, not to understand where you're coming from, but to try to change your mind. This also happens in the political arena a lot. People will ask questions about someone's political beliefs, only to get to a point where it's like a gotcha. It's like, I knew you were going to say that. Now let me roll out the CVS receipt of all the different reasons why you're wrong and all of the different facts that I have that was waiting for this moment for you to say that. And I think that is going to put that person on the defensive because now they're feeling attacked. B, it actually doesn't help you to understand them better, and understand where they're coming from. C, it's not going to encourage them to be curious towards you so they could actually listen to and understand where you're coming from, which would create mutual learning and collective growth, for both of you in terms of your perspective. That's not a really helpful tactic. Predatory curiosity also shows up in our culture and in our workplaces. We might have biases that we hold, and so we assume that someone is wrong just by how they look or their identities or a feeling that we have. And so we're asking all of these questions and putting all the pressure and getting curious to try to paint a picture that proves your agenda, proves that this person is guilty or did something wrong, or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And that is not true curiosity, and that also inflames the biases that people are holding on to, the assumptions that people are holding on to in our culture. Also in the workplace, predatory curiosity might look like asking team members questions because you have a disagreement about a work project. And so you're asking questions to try to pick apart your arguments because maybe you were in speech and debate, or maybe you're trained as a lawyer, or maybe you have like these skills and you're doing it to advance your own goals rather than seeing that, hey, maybe we all share the same goal. How do we ensure that we're rising up together? I think there is a way that we can do that even in the workplace.
It's funny that you mentioned lawyers because, of course, the judiciary is full of people who are trained as lawyers. The types of questions you're talking about, this heart centered curiosity, is really not the type of questioning that's really taught in law school.
I don't want to devalue all of the incredible skills and knowledge and mindsets that you gain as getting a law degree or as a lawyer, but there is a time and place for it. And bringing those skills into an internal team environment, for instance, like during an all hands on deck meeting, or when you're in a one-on-one, with someone that you're supervising, isn't necessarily going to help you to create a positive work culture. But what is you being really curious and asking these questions and trying to relate to people and understand people in these very nuanced and deep ways. So I think context and setting really, really does matter. And to just be constantly curious about, when can I best use these skills? When do they most shine? When am I kind of going on autopilot and just like relying on this or falling back on this? And it might not actually be helpful, right? And that's why I always say there's multiple directions to curiosity. It's not just getting curious about the other person that's in front of me. I also need to be inwardly curious. I need to extend that curiosity towards myself. I need to really explore and investigate how I'm showing up in spaces, how I'm wielding power, how I'm thinking about people. What are the biases and assumptions I might hold? How might I counter that? That's all a part of the journey of curiosity, too.
We've got a good sense of what heartfelt curiosity is. And I know early on you talked about some of the benefits. Is there anything you'd like to add in terms of the impacts of being incurious?
I think that one of the mantras I like to use is fear is curiosity without a breath. Fear is real. It's a real part of life. Sometimes that fear is imagined. It's something that we've created in our minds. It's a story, but the fear it feels real and the fear impacts our decisions and the fear can impact our relationships and the fear can thus impact our life. And why I love the mantra, fear is curiosity without a breath, is because the best way to really unwind that fear, the best way to really move through it with courage, the best way to serve an antidote to it is to be curious. And I probably learned this the most from end of life doulas that I interviewed for the book, because end of life anxiety and fear is real. A lot of people feel it. No matter what time horizon they are in their life, people still feel it as they're dying as well. And what end of life doulas that I talk to have found is that curiosity is such a powerful tool in that moment. Both their own curiosity to just witness and to accompany and to see the person who is dying and their loved ones, and to not try to fix, not try to change, but to really just be there and be present, which is such a beautiful gift. But it's also to evoke the curiosity of the person who is dying, to ask them questions about what brought them meaning in their life and what are their fondest memories and what do they want us to know, as we continue on this journey of life, and how do they want to die? Do you want to be cremated? Do you want to be buried? These seem like questions, especially in the US, that feel very uncomfortable for us to ask and feel really scary. Just like we might feel about asking questions in the workplace, right? But like I said, it doesn't mean that they're not important. It actually is so important that we ask these questions. And actually, that's what many people want. At that point in their life, what many of these end of life doulas have realized is that they are the most them that they'll ever be, because they no longer have these social pressures that they need to live up to. They know that the end is near. And so they are the most themselves that they've ever been. And they want to be seen as their most authentic self as they are. And so asking those questions really gives them the potential to step into that, but it also gives you the ability to be present to it and to actually witness that. And that's really a beautiful experience. And you don't often have the luxury or benefit, but when that is a possibility, to actually be courageous and lean into your curiosity is such a great way to unwind that fear. Anytime you're feeling fear, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in your life, maybe there's a big transition happening, you're changing jobs, you're moving to a new place, you're getting married, which is a joyful thing, but also can bring up some fears, to just get curious and to wonder, what is this going to look like? What are the possibilities? And that curiosity will actually propel you forward and reduce the fear.
And there's fear in workplaces, fear of not looking competent or being competent.
And the fear, like I said, is sometimes imagined. When you practice intellectual humility, which is, basically like a sibling of curiosity, to know that you have limits to your knowledge, to say, I don't know, or let's go figure that out. I don't know everything, right? Intellectual humility is basically like the opposite of arrogance. And what we know is that people want to work with intellectually humble leaders. I think a lot of fears that folks have is, oh, but if I say I don't know things, or if I practice intellectual humility or curiosity, it's going to make me look incompetent. But what the psychological research actually shows is that people see you as more competent because you're intellectually humble, because you are curious.
What else besides fear trips us up?
I think there's sort of trauma at its biggest points, but also just negative experiences that we've had in the past at a smaller point, where we go through something in our lives. Let's say we have a job as an executive somewhere else, and then we take up a new job as an executive at this workplace. And we hold all of that baggage and all of those memories and all of those experiences inside of us. And so we might say, oh, well, I don't want to show up in a particular way. I don't want to be curious because I know what that did for me in the last environment that got me exposed. And then trauma also holds us back. I talked to a lot of trauma-informed psychologists. Kevin Becker, for instance, says that curiosity is the barometer of healing. And a lot of folks will say, oh, I don't feel like I've healed at all. It's been a year or 2 years since this thing has happened. I like to point to the ways that they've been curious and grown in their curiosity, because, again, curiosity is a barometer of healing. And I think the final thing that kind of holds us back too is this idea of time. But what you're missing is that curiosity could actually free up a lot more time for you, right? If you spend your entire life never really being curious about yourself and what you really want, what you really need, you might waste or lose a lot of time doing things that you didn't actually want to do. I do understand that we live in a time famine that is really accelerated by the culture that we live in. That is very true. That's not our fault. That's not your fault. That's not my fault. It's just the fault of many of the systems that we live in today, which need to be changed. Which again, if we can only get curious about those systems, so then we can actually change it. But recognize how curiosity can actually save you on time. And in fact, do even more than that, actually help you use your time more intentionally and more purposefully. And so giving yourself that space to be curious is really, really important, and is like a great skill to teach folks who are just starting in the workforce. Let's model that for them. The one thing that I write about a lot in the book is to have self-compassion and grace. I think that, we are sometimes going to get it wrong. We're trying to understand this person, see them in a deeper way. We cross a boundary. We're going to respect that boundary, but I'm going to also give myself self-compassion. At the same time, we also need to give grace to other people. Some people might be asking us a question or being curious about things that we really don't want them to be. And we could cancel them, or we could choose, a more graceful approach and say, hey, don't worry, that's just not a conversation I want to have in this setting, whatever it is. And so I think practicing self-compassion and grace is a really great engine for creating a culture of curiosity.
If you had one thing you would suggest to judiciary leaders to try, what would it be?
One of the first meaty chapters in my book is on detach, which is really about how do we let go of our ABCs, our assumptions, biases, and certainty. We hold on to these certainties about other people, but even about our philosophies around work. We've always done a project this way. The organization has always worked this way. The institution has always been like this, so it's never going to change, or we shouldn't even try. And so curiosity isn't just about asking questions. It's also about letting go of the grip, from our certainty and saying, well, maybe there could be a different way. It might take a lot of work, but it is something that's worthwhile in investing in. And the same are true with our assumptions and biases. They're not as easy to just like one day you take a curiosity pill and you no longer have assumptions and biases. It's an lifelong journey to interrupt them and to challenge them. But you can, remember to practice, and you can do that at the beginning of a project. You can say, what are the assumptions that you're holding about this project? Let's all go around and talk about that so that we can, work towards challenging any of them that we have. It might be in the onboarding process. What are the assumptions that you're holding about our team, about the workplace, and how can we talk about that and actually expand on that? What are the assumptions you're holding about me as a manager? How can I share more insight so that you're not holding on to those assumptions, that you're actually coming in with this open mind and this open heart, to experience it for yourself. So letting go of your ABCs, your assumptions, biases, and certainty is such a great place to start, to detach. I think sometimes people immediately jump to like, what are the questions I can ask? But if those questions are fueled by your assumptions and fueled by your biases and fueled by your sense of certainty, well, that's not really going to be super helpful. So I would start there. Start from a place of detach.
Scott, where can we learn more about you and your work?
I welcome you to pick up a copy of Seek, How Curiosity Can Transform Your Life and Change the World. I would love to talk to you about it. Feel free to message me. My contact info is in the book. And you can also go to seekthebook.com, SEEK, thebook.com. I also have some free resources up there for managers. If you've read the book, please reach out. Would love to talk to you about how curiosity shows up in your personal and professional life.
This was a wonderful conversation. We're so happy that you were here to join us today. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I really appreciated it. Stay curious, everyone.
Thanks, Lori, and thanks to our listening audience. To hear more episodes of this podcast, visit the podcast link at fjc.dcn/EE. You can also listen and subscribe to this podcast via Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. All episodes are also available on fjc.gov. In Session, Leading the Judiciary is produced by Shelley Easter. Our program is supported by Angela Long, Jamie Mitchell, and the entire studio and live production team. This podcast was produced at U.S. taxpayer expense. Until next time, thanks for listening.